Hi there. I'm Christine Dunbar from speechmodification.com, and this is my Smart American Accent training. Welcome to our live Friday question and answer class, where we talk about American English pronunciation, intonation, the American accent, and I take your questions to help you improve your personal and professional communication in American English. Those of you who've been to class before know that we always have a topic that we talk about, and I will share some information and resources. I'll show you related videos on my YouTube channel, Speech Modification Seattle, as well as on my website, speechmodification.com. If you're watching the live broadcast on YouTube, you can type your questions in the chat at any time, and I'll be pausing and reading the questions, answering them for you, and showing you resources related to your questions. If you're watching on Facebook on the rebroadcast, you can also leave questions in the comments. If you'd like to hear me say your word or answer your question live, then jump over to the YouTube class the next time we have that. It's every Friday at 12 o'clock Seattle time. On Facebook, I answer the questions by typing in the chat because it's a replay, but you can get a good answer there as well. And I'll give you links to information in the live broadcast. Another new thing we've been starting on the channel is our Word of the Day broadcasts. So far we've been talking about words like quality and extraordinary. We had the word, what else did we have so far? I've been taking your requests, and so you can ask for a word of the day on Facebook or in the comments of any of my videos. And I have a little list. Our next word of the day for tomorrow is going to be the word agile or agile. So we're going to be talking about that commonly used business word. We'll be talking about difficult words and also words where I've noticed a lot of people have accent error patterns. And I share the accent error patterns you might have, as well as how to correct them and how to practice to be able to use the word correctly and accurately, and to be confident in using whatever you'd like, whatever words you'd like when you're speaking in American English. Hi, nice to see everyone. Thank you for attending and for your questions so far. So our first question today, someone would like to know how to break down the word towards. That's a great question. So this is related to something I was talking about in today's word of the day class, which was how towards, how the way a word is spelled sometimes makes us think it has more syllables than it does. So this looks like the words to and the word wards, towards, but we don't actually say towards like two syllables. We pretty much run that together, and this oo sound is almost not even there. It sounds more like towards. And in addition, the letters AR actually say the OR sound, towards. So that is going to be another challenge in terms of spelling. There is a very small kind of ooh-like sound in there, towards, but that comes naturally as I say the W sound, because the W sound is really a glide between ooh and ooh and the sound. So I just make my natural ooh from the W, towards, and you'll hear that ooh sound. Yeah, so to build that word, I would probably start with or, and then I would try war, and then twar, toward, towards. You may find it challenging to put that Z sound on. It may want to sound more like an S or drop off entirely. You could try doing towards. It might be easier to get that Z sound on. So yes, that's a challenging word, and thank you for your question. I hope that helped you break down the word and get all of the sounds correct. Javier wants to know how to pronounce resume and prefer. And so he's asking about the first syllable and whether or not what to say for this vowel sound. So in the dictionary, he's seeing that they're writing it as resume, and prefer with the short reduced I vowel. And I do think that's how most Americans will say these words in context. I think they prefer when they resume talking to do the I sound. However, we also will hear that more as an sound, like prefer and resume. And that's simply something that comes up for many unstressed syllables. The most important thing is that those first syllables in both those words are short and reduced. And so they have a reduced vowel, which can either sound like the schwa, reduced, resume, or the I, resume. There really doesn't matter for most listeners. They're not going to be able to hear the difference between which one you're doing. So whatever you're most comfortable doing with a reduced vowel sound in the unstressed syllable is what I would suggest trying. And you're correct. You probably will hear a mix of both. For me, I don't think I really can hear the difference too much in most people's speech. What we don't want is resume or prefer with a tense E vowel. All right. Hi, everybody. We have another question about the words chaos. That's a good one. And bias. Okay, so here's another place where spelling might confuse us because we see the letters AS at the ends of both of these words, but they aren't pronounced the same in both of these words. So in chaos, we have a strange spelling for the sound k. Normally it's not spelled with CH, just in a few places. And then we have an OA. I misspelled it. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Chaos. So the letter A in this word says the sound A, like this. So I would say K. And then the AS in chaos sounds like vowel and an S. And it has first syllable stress, so it's long, short, chaos. But in bias, we also have first syllable stress. So the line shows a syllable stress. By, diphthong I, bias. And in this AS is a reduced schwa sound, like we were talking about earlier in the reduced syllable. So long, short, bias. So when there's a lot of chaos around us, we might be more prone to having our own bias. Great questions. Thank you. Bernice would like to know how to pronounce verbs with S and the word it to connect the two words. For example, makes it interesting. Makes it. So if I were going to say makes it interesting, I sort of link them, makes it. There's not a real clear break between those two. Makes it. What you might find challenging about that is doing the KS sound. In this case, it's a voiceless sound because the K is voiceless, makes. If I had, for example, needs it, then it would be voiced because the D is voiced, and that would sound more like needs it. But makes it, I would say, it sounds a little bit like makes it. There's not a big break there. So it's just a natural way of linking the words because the next word starts with a vowel. So you can think about if it's easier to say makes it or makes it, you don't really need a break between the two. Great question. Thank you. Okay, next question. Why is the letter T or the sound T dropped in words such as center? So that time I just said it with a very clear T, center. But often when there's an NT in the middle, we don't really hear that T sound, center. So for example, internet, I can say it with internet with the T, but often you'll hear people say it a little bit more like internet. The thing that I'll caution you about is that I don't want to hold that N very long in center or inter if I'm leaving the T out, because you can hear the difference if I say inner. It sounds different than if I say internet. So making sure that the N is very short, then the brain will still perceive that you're saying the word with the T. For example, if I say center with a long N, it doesn't really sound like center. Center, short N, center. This is what we want to avoid. Okay, so that's kind of a complicated thing. When in doubt, it's okay to say center and internet. It's pretty normal. I think Americans do a mix of both leaving out the T and making a small T sound in there. You don't necessarily want to do internet with a really pronounced T. So kind of softening it might be a good way to go for the in-between, excuse me. Whichever is easiest for you to pronounce the word clearly where people understand it, I think is the most important. And then also understanding why and what Americans do if you want to have that accent and that American sound. I try to point out both. So, in my opinion, it's more important to be clearly understood than to sound exactly like the American accent. But if you work on it and you listen and you pay attention to these details, you can have that American sound too. So it depends on your priority and what you're working on. I always tend to prioritize the things that will clear up communication and make people understand you well the first time you're speaking and what they're listening to. Okay, lots of great requests today. Let's see, we're doing just fine on time. So now we have the request for the word recorded and or. So recorded and or. Let's start with or because we need or to say recorded. Or is basically just the tight back with the round O shape first. And I'm not really in connected speech. I'm not really doing a long or. I glide fairly quickly between the two. Or. So you kind of have the O shape and then you just tighten up the tongue into the or. And for recorded, syllable stress is on the second syllable. And there's our I vowel, like we were talking about in resume. Recorded. Lastly, I have the final D. Make sure you have a voice sound there and the vowel I. So I would build that as or, core, record, recorded, short, long, short. Typically, if you build the word from the sounds and you go as slow as you need to say all the sounds correctly, you can then begin to speed up and say it more naturally and then begin to use it in small phrases. So we have a question about, I think you're asking about the word module. Tell me if I'm wrong. And you're saying you hear a ch sound, module. What you're hearing is that the letters du in this word actually say j, the j sound, ma. So we have mod and kind of a d module with an u. So you want to be careful not to use a ch there. You don't want module, too much. The ch is the voiceless version of the voice j. So just you can try jewel, odule, module, and then you'll get that correct sound. There's a lot of words that have a hidden J sound. We've talked about this in previous classes. And I have a lesson on my website for it. I'll use this as an opportunity to show you how to look things up. So if you go to speechmodification.com, I recommend going to I'm on the courses page now. So here's our 6-week course, but I'm going to go to the home page. And there I'm going to go to the free practice and the online practice free trial. And there's a search box here, which will help you find lessons and answers to your questions. So I'm going to just put in the letter J. I could also type in hidden J if you know that's what you're looking for. And I can see all the lessons related to the J sound. So pronouncing J in American English, tips for Spanish speakers. So I'm just going to go to pronouncing the J sound in American English. And you can see what the common error patterns are. You can watch a video about it. And you can see common words that have the J sound. And you'll see that sometimes it's spelled with a D and a U. So some other words like your word module would be words like education, graduate, individual, procedure. So you can learn where that pattern is. And if you have trouble with the word module, you likely also have that same question or pattern with words like procedure and schedule. So that I think is really helpful to know about the patterns that you have. Of course, it's great to work on individual words, to ask me about individual words. But when you start to notice, a lot of times my words have an R, or a lot of times I'm not sure about this word, and it turns out it has a particular sound spelled a particular way, then you can find and correct additional words that would have potentially the same accent error pattern. To know a little bit more about your accent error patterns, one thing I suggest is going to my store page. And you can see on the store page that I have some free downloads. And going on the free downloads, you can find information for many, many different languages about the accent error patterns you're likely to have. We have pronunciation difficulties in second and third languages because we have a sound system in our brain from our first language. And when the rules from our first language don't match the rules in the next language that we learn, then that's where we get accent errors. It might be that you don't have the sound in your language, or you do have the sound, but it's not used in the same way. So I can look up, for example, if I'm a Spanish speaker or if I speak Tamil or Russian, I can look up and see, okay, here's a lot of the patterns that come because of my native language when I'm speaking English. So that's on speechmodification.com. And if you're ever looking for resources or information, you can also leave that in the comments and I'll give you the link. So oftentimes there's a lot out there, right? There's a lot of information. It's hard to know what is good information, what to trust. And everything that I put on YouTube or on my website, I've researched, I've learned from working with hundreds and hundreds of people on their accents and from taking advantage of other people's research, looking and finding the latest information to help you. While we're on the website, I also just want to show you quickly that I do have a group class coming up starting next week. There's a few spots left in my group class, and that's going to be on Tuesdays at 10:30 Seattle time. And everyone's going to come. We're going to have a live class for 45 minutes. Unlike my YouTube class, it's not free, but I will be able to hear you and see you, and it's an interactive live class. Lasts for 6 weeks and gets a lot of the fundamentals for American accent training. So again, there's a few spots left for that. Check it out on speechmodification.com if you're interested, or if you have questions about it, you can contact me and I'll let you know. All right, we have a few words that I haven't yet gotten to, so thank you for your patience. The next question is, oh my goodness, I'm very behind on the questions. So sorry. We have the word frightening. And here's another example. We have kind of a theme today. It looks like it should be frightening, but Americans will very frequently say this more like frightening, where we leave the middle syllable out. So we tend to do two syllables. I think in this case, it's not incorrect if I say frightening. That was very frightening. But it's much more likely that, especially if I'm using it to describe a frightening situation, a frightening movie, that I'm going to leave that syllable out. If I say that was very frightening, and that's the time I'm most likely to use all three syllables. So we have our R, our FR blend. Vowel is I diphthong, frighten, and then we tend to go right from a stop T, fright. So I don't release it. I don't say fright. I say frighten, and I go right into a syllabic N, frightening. Vowel I and NG sound. Great word, thank you. We have another question. Linking between D and T, such as in managed to, used to, switched to. Difficult to distinguish the sound. Yes, I'm going to use your example, used to. I used to. In this case, we often in casual speech will say it more like used to. So it kind of sounds like used to with an sound, used to. I wouldn't use that professionally, but if I was talking with a friend, I might say, oh, I used to do that, used to. Used to, yeah, I actually think I might use that professionally as well. I used to work with this company. Because we often reduce the oo into to a t, I know your question was more about the D and the T, so used to. I pretty much do a stopped D and release it into the T. Used to. And that becomes a flap T. So I would say used to, manage to, manage to. I'm not typically very careful to put the D on managed, because if I do that, I have to make a break. I managed to do it. We would tend to say managed to do it, where we make a stop D, we don't release the air, and we just release it right into the T of to. That is a difficult combination, and I would say just finding a couple phrases like that to practice. Go slowly and see if you can stop on the D and release right into the T. That should help you. Okay, question about, do atom and atom sound the same? What do you call this feature of American English? So that's called a homophone. Homophone, two things that sound the same like homo, and phone, sound. And she's asking about the name atom and the particle, the atom. So in American English, yes, we use a flap on both of these. So a flap T sounds basically like a light D. I'm not saying Adam with a strong D. It's very light. So I have that flap that's kind of between a T and a D. Atom, and those are called homophones. I have a number of videos and lessons about other common words that are homophones. And oftentimes people see words that look like they should be different. For example, these two words look like they should have different pronunciation, but in American English, they're the same. So they both have vowel I, bin. And in British English, this one is more like bean with vowel E. American English, they're the same. So sometimes just because two words are spelled differently, we might be trying to pronounce them differently, and then we're creating an error. Whereas if we learn about what the sounds are and learn that those are the same, that can really help us pronounce both of the words. So definitely check those out. When you're on the channel page for speech modification, what you can do is you can use the search tool on the channel page as well, and you can find homophones and other videos. You can also leave a comment, and I'll direct you to where those videos are. And yeah, I'll show you more from the channel page later, because I do like to try to share resources so that you can find what you're looking for. Many times people are asking me questions where I do already have videos and lessons about it, and I'm happy to direct you to those. Okay. We have a question. Can I pronounce the word it like as in until it was finished? So until it was finished. No, I would definitely not do that. So the question was whether or not the word it can be reduced down to just a schwa sound. And the sample phrase was until it was finished. What I would do is pronounce that as an I, an I, vowel I with a stopped T. Until it was finished. It was finished. If I try it more like until I was finished, then it's very unclear what you're saying. Then you might be saying until I was finished, until something was finished. That sounds it doesn't sound very good. So I would definitely make sure that you use the I with a stop T in your phrase. There are a lot of places where we reduce and we use the vowel schwa, but not to substitute for a word like it. Good question. Thank you. All right. Natalia would like to know, when is the X pronounced like a Z, as in exam or exactly? And when is it pronounced as a KS, like excuse? Is it because the first is surrounded by vowels? So I have a lesson about this, and actually I can put that in the chat for you, because I was just talking about it this morning in the Word of the Day class. We were talking about the word extraordinary. And so I have a list of words, and they're sorted by which ones have the G sound. So that's in the chat there now, and which have the KS sound. And I do think there are some rules. Off the top of my head, I'm not thinking of what those are, but let's look at, again, online practice free trial. And I'm just going to type X in so I can find the lesson. And I'll see, here's how to pronounce words with letter X in American English. There's also a YouTube video that's part of the lesson here. And okay, so the rule, I'm checking my own information. When the X is before the stressed vowel, we pronounce it as a GZ. So for example, if you look at that word, example, there's the stress is on the second syllable, and so we have the GZ. Less common, let's see, when the most common pronunciation is KS, and when the X is at the end of the word, or when it's after the stressed vowel, such as an extra. So on extra, we have first syllable stress, and we have the KS sound. And on example, we have second syllable stress, and we have the GZ. I think this rule applies across the board for words with X, but a safe way to check is to use an online dictionary, and you'll see either the KS if it's a word like excuse, or you'll see in the symbols, you'll see the GZ in a word like example. So here again, exam, we have second syllable stress, and we have the GZ sound. Great question, and something that I have looked into before, and you can read about in more detail on that link that I put in the chat for you. Thank you. Okay, let's see. I'm again a little bit behind on your questions, but I can go a little bit long today, so I should have time for everyone's questions. Again, if you're watching the replay, please feel free to put your questions in the comments, and I'll let you know where you can find information and answers. And that holds true for Facebook as well. You can put those in the comments if you're watching the Facebook replay. We have a question. In the phrase, what we're eating, is the letter T glottal stop what, and the tongue touch the lower teeth because followed by the W sound. What we're eating. My tongue doesn't go down on that one. What we're eating. I think I either touch up to the T position for a stop T, or if I stop it further in my throat, what we're eating, then my tongue just stays neutral. We have a question. Pattern. Are you asking me to pronounce the word pattern? In which case, I will. Pattern. We have. Watch out that you use a voiceless. You should feel a puff of air on that word. There's some people with different backgrounds, such as Portuguese, Arabic, some other languages, some Indian languages, will not have that release of air on a word like pattern. It'll sound more like pattern. And Americans hear that as a B, even though you're saying a P, it's just a different P. So release of air. And then we have a flap T, pattern. It sounds more like a D. You need a tight American R, and you end on an N. Pattern. First syllable, short second syllable. That's a word that I use a lot, and I think I may be adding that one to the words of the day because I've had a few people ask me about that word recently. We have a question or a request, making a video about all of the sounds in a text created to evaluate English learners' pronunciation. It contains almost all the sounds of English. Okay, I will check into that. Probably I won't have time to be making a video about it anytime too soon, but that sounds like something that might be useful for English learners. Junior, if you have that text somewhere and you can paste it in the comments for me later, maybe after the video is done, that would be really helpful. I'm sure I can find it online as well, but that'll serve as a good reminder for me for your request. We have a question about the word hour and hours. So here's another homophone. It's the same pronunciation as the word hour, like the time, hour like the possessive. And it starts with the vowel ow, like in brown cow, which looks like ow. It's a diphthong. And then we have the tight back R. So one thing that might help you is thinking about there being a little hidden W in there, hour, because as I close on the ow and I open back for the hour, my lips end up gliding and making a bit of a W sound there. And then hours, same thing, just add a Z sound, hours. I do have, I talk about those words in some of my homophone videos, but maybe not in that much detail about the sounds in them. So question about frightening, glottal T versus center, drop T. Why do you use glottal in one case and drop it in the other case? It's basically the same combination, TN. Yes, so if I'm saying frightening, there's two syllables versus center. It's because frightening is a reduction, so that's a syllabic N, and then NT in center, NT, it's in the sounds are in reverse order from each other. So I think that's the main difference. One thing that you might like is, I'll put a link in the chat for you about what T does in the center of words. There I go with center. And it breaks down a lot of detailed rules about NT, about which syllable gets the stress, when we use a flap, when we use a stop T. And I think I have that handy here so I can put it in there for you, because we've been talking about flap T quite a bit in our word of the day videos as well as in this class. So I'll put that here, and you can find that also if you search in the search tools on speechmodification.com. You just search for T or middle T or American T, that lesson will come up. It's a really great one because there's videos for each of the different patterns and a fairly comprehensive word list, so you can start to learn how that works. It's pretty complex, and but there are groups and patterns of words that will help you learn why one does one and one does another. So we had a request for how to pronounce our, H-O-U-R, and we just talked about that because it's a homophone with our, O-U-R, so we've got that covered. Nice to see you, Wasil. And his question is, how do you pronounce Xerox? Xerox. And let's see if you're correct. So you're saying Xerox. Yeah, I think we kind of do an E-er, Xerox. So whether this is an or just an R remains to be seen. We have to glide in between. So we have to do the E, the R sound, and then we have to go into the ah, vowel ah, Xerox, and then we have a KS at the end. So yes, I would say the way you wrote it out, Xerox, is basically how we say it. Xerox. I started writing it a K. So it's spelled with an X, Xerox. And first syllable stress, long, short, Xerox. Also, his additional question was glad or bath. So he's asking about the words glad and bath and whether or not they have vowel a, like in black cat, or vowel ah, like in not hot. So I pronounce both of those with the a, black cat vowel. So glad and bath. I would say that's typical American English. Other dialects of English might use more of an ah there, like glad or bath. But most Americans are going to be using an a sound. That's very standard for American English. You're welcome, everyone who's thanking me for pronouncing their words. Thank you for asking me and giving me lots of great words to talk about. I know when you ask a question, other people often have the same question, and it's very helpful for other people listening. And thank you also for being patient while I'm going through other people's questions, and I will get to yours as well. Okay, so we have a question about the difference between properly and correctly. And I'm assuming you're asking more about the meaning. So properly is a little bit broader in that it might mean, it can also mean like proper and improper would mean not just correct or incorrect, but whether or not it's appropriate. So, for example, someone can behave properly for a situation. We want our children to behave properly in school. We also want them to answer correctly. So, correct or incorrect tends to be more specific to factual or not, and proper can have more of an interpretation of what's proper behavior or what's appropriate to a particular situation. That's me talking off the top of my head. I definitely recommend using a dictionary and looking up both words, because you can often see in the dictionary examples of uses, and it'll help differentiate those more specifically. Again, I'm talking about what comes to mind when I think about it based on my knowledge, but there's probably a more appropriate answer or more correct proper answer in the dictionary. Okay, so we have a comment, track, and track sounds the same. So you wrote both of those the same way, so I'm not sure what you're talking about. Maybe you're thinking about the ah and the ah sounding very similar. And that's not too surprising for many people, because the vowels, ah and ah, in some languages, you might have a vowel that's a little bit in between. So when we were talking about glad and back, we're talking about more of a front vowel, and the ah vowel is more open in the back. A lot of languages have this, or they might have one that's about here. It sounds more similar to ah than to ah. Ah is pretty distinctive American sound. Okay, so I'm showing you that, and some of you have seen the vowel quadrangle before. That's something that if you're having trouble with hearing the difference between vowel sounds, I would definitely recommend checking out my vowels playlist. It goes through each of the sounds and gives you example words. There's also some videos in the beginning of the playlist that help you hear and listen to the different sounds. That helps your ear begin to absorb the American sound system and understand sounds and spelling. Spelling definitely has an influence on how we pronounce different vowel sounds, and can have sometimes a negative influence on correct pronunciation. That's something we'll be talking about in our 6-week class in a lot of detail: how to use those tools to understand vowels, how to use online dictionaries to develop your listening and your ear. Our accent acts as a filter on how we hear, as well as on how we pronounce. And so being able to begin to differentiate and improve our hearing for our accent is very useful in helping with our pronunciation. Okay, so let's see. Thank you and goodbye to those of you who are saying you have to go. Yeah, I'm kind of running a little long today, so thanks for sticking with me. I did want to try to cover everybody's questions today because I have a little bit of extra time. If you've got to go, you can check the last part of class later on the replay if you're interested. You can find those on the channel page. Okay, Wasil corrected. He was saying track and truck sound the same to him. Good. Yeah, so track is the vowel ah, that's down here in the bottom corner. And truck is the vowel and that's here in a central vowel. And so if I'm saying other words like that would be hat and hut, or gnat and nut. Yeah. So I'm going to suggest, again, trying to listen and get some words that you can hear the difference in between. The sound is more central, and the sound, my mouth has to be more open. Again, it can be challenging to hear the difference there, and that's probably because maybe you might not have either of those lax vowels in your language. Thinking about often pairing it with another word can help. Like, for example, some trucks and at the track. I can sometimes hear it in words that aren't the same. I can hear some and truck are the same, and at and track. So that's one suggestion I have. Playing around with other words and listening to hear where you can hear those vowels, and then using those to help you separate out the ones that sound the same to you. That's my general suggestion and technique for that. Okay. Question about how long it takes to get fluent in spoken English. It really depends on how much time you spend working on it, where you're starting from, what your English language level is, and how many opportunities you get to actually practice and use your English. I would say the more you can speak it, even if you're speaking aloud to yourself, the more you can listen to it, even if you're just watching American and British movies and TV, the more you have to use it for communication, the faster you'll become fluent in it. In terms of pronunciation, oftentimes it takes a long time to get fluent and to be able to pronounce everything correctly. I try to give you ways to do that efficiently. And again, the more you practice, the better, both in terms of listening and in terms of speaking. We have a question about house and houses. House and house. Is this a typical pattern? So she's saying, she's letting us know about the verb to house has a Z, and the noun house has an S. And she's asking if this is a typical pattern. I can't think of exceptions or examples of that right now. I would say oftentimes the SE, more often will say Z than S. Yeah, that's a good question. I'll get back to you on that, and I'll think about the patterns. I have a lot of resources about understanding S versus Z, but I'm not thinking of a lot of, I think in some cases when it's the noun and the verb are the same. So for example, like place, that's a different spelling. So I don't know if you're just asking specifically about the spelling, but place noun and place verb both have an S. Yeah, I think house is actually probably less common, and staying with the same S or Z for both noun and verb, it might be more common. But again, I'd have to research it and let you know, because it's not something that I've looked into too carefully yet. So I don't want to give you a definitive answer until I know that. Okay, yes, you're welcome. Thank you for all the nice thank yous. Diamond Fighter had a good example, use and use. Yeah, so there is another example of use being the verb and use being the noun. Oftentimes we use those two, house and house. We use house more than we use house. So sometimes the noun or the verb is the one we know more, and then people tend to make an error because they're used to using one rather than the other. So, oftentimes with things that are spelled with letter S, we think it should be the sound S. And you do have to check in the dictionary sometimes to see if you're looking at the noun or the verb, and to click on the other to make sure that you're matching the correct pronunciation. Okay, great. Wonderful questions today, everybody. Thank you for sticking with this extra long class. Usually we keep the class to about 30 minutes. Usually that's because of my schedule. Oftentimes you have questions that could go longer. If you're watching the replay or you think of a question after class is finished, please feel free to put that in the comments. And I'll be back tomorrow with our word of the day, which is going to be agile or agile. And you'll hear me saying that two different ways. So that'll be an interesting class because we'll talk about the two different pronunciations for the same word with the same meaning. And that's something that often is it's kind of a buzzword these days in business. And we'll be back next Friday with our live question and answer class. So thank you so much for being a part of class. I hope some of you will be able to join my Tuesday live class that's starting up next week. Check that out on speechmodification.com. Thanks again for being here today. I'm Christine Dunbar from speechmodification.com. Remember, if you want to sound American, you can do it. speechmodification.com. Thanks, everybody. Bye.